Three rich men made the humble caretaker talk to the princess. But the impossible happened. Michael Thompson wiped his dirty hands on his worn-out pants as the three bosses dragged him through the golden hall of the most luxurious hotel in New York City. His heart beat irregularly when he realized all eyes of the city's elite turned to him. "Go on, Michael. Talk to Elizabeth Parker," laughed Richard Morgan, pushing him toward the most elegant woman at the party. "I bet $1,000 you'll stutter on the first word." "2,000 that he faints," added Frank Wilson, adjusting his expensive tuxedo. "3,000 that she calls security," said the third, Gregory Pearson, savoring his bourbon. Michael tried to back away, but he felt the businessman's hands on his back, forcing him forward. He had taken care of Richard's country house for 12 years, always invisible, always silent. Now, dressed in his only wrinkled dress shirt, he felt like an animal on display at the zoo. The woman had her back turned, talking to other society ladies. Her golden dress shimmered under the crystal chandelier lights, her brown hair tied in a perfect bun. When she turned around, Michael felt the world stop. Elizabeth's green eyes widened. Her hand trembled so much that the champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Silence took over the hall. "My God," she whispered, bringing her hand to her chest. The businessman laughed, thinking she was horrified by his presence. But Michael saw something different in those eyes. Recognition, fear, and something that seemed guilt. "Elizabeth," he murmured, unable to believe it. She shook her head slowly, tears beginning to form. Her hands sought support on the nearby table. Are you okay?" asked Michael, completely forgetting where he was. She swallowed dryly. "I need to get out of here." Without another word, Elizabeth hurriedly crossed the hall, leaving a trail of confused murmurs. The businessman still laughed, satisfied with what they considered a complete humiliation. "See?" roared Richard. "She couldn't even look at you properly." "You lost the bet," added Frank. "The caretaker made the princess run away." But Michael no longer heard anything. His world had collapsed with that encounter. It was her. He was absolutely certain. The green-eyed girl who had changed his life 16 years ago. The next morning, Michael was raking the garden when he heard the sound of an expensive car approaching. His stomach tightened as he recognized the silver Lexus. Elizabeth stepped out of the vehicle, wearing a discreet but still elegant dress. Her hands trembled as she approached. "We need to talk," she said, her voice almost inaudible. "We have nothing to talk about, Miss Elizabeth," replied Michael, continuing to work without looking at her. "You know we do." He stopped working and finally faced her. The same green eyes, the same faint freckles around the nose. 16 years older, but it was her. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice heavy with old pain. "Because I spent all these years looking for you." Michael let out a bitter laugh. "Looking? You abandoned me there. You said you'd get help and never came back." "I did come back," she exclaimed, desperate. "I came back with the firefighters, with everyone. But you were no longer there. I thought you had—" "That I had what?" Elizabeth closed her eyes, remembering that terrible day. "The factory was on fire. You were trapped under that beam. I managed to help you out, but you were badly hurt. I said I'd get help, and when you returned, I had already gotten out by myself," completed Michael, "because I realized no one was really going to help me. No one ever cared about the janitor's son." "That's not true, isn't it?" he approached her. "So why did you disappear from my life? Why did I never see you at the factory again? Why did your father fire me a week later?" Elizabeth opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't. The memories from that period were confusing, painful. She was just a 15-year-old teenager when everything happened. "My father, he said it was dangerous for me to keep going there. Said another accident could happen. Of course, and it was easier to believe him than to fight for me." The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Richard was approaching the porch of the main house, clearly irritated. "Michael, what is this woman doing here?" "Nothing, Mr. Richard. She was already leaving." Elizabeth looked between the two men, sensing the tension. "Richard Morgan," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I didn't know you were his boss." "Elizabeth Parker," he replied with a fake smile. "What a pleasure to have you on my property. May I ask what brings you here?" "Personal matters." "Personal?" Richard laughed. "With Michael? How interesting." Michael sensed the danger in his boss's voice. Richard wasn't a man to accept mysteries, especially when they involved people from his social circle. "Miss Elizabeth was already leaving," Michael said quickly. "Of course I was," she agreed, realizing the delicate situation. "It was a pleasure seeing you again, Michael." She got in the car and drove off, leaving Michael under Richard's suspicious gaze. "What's this all about? How do you know Elizabeth Parker?" "We worked together a long time ago when we were young." "Worked?" Richard arched an eyebrow. "She's never worked a day in her life, born with a silver spoon in her mouth." "At her father's company. I was the janitor's son." Richard processed the information, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Interesting, very interesting indeed." That afternoon, Richard met with Frank and Gregory in his company's office. The three partners were discussing the biggest deal of their lives, the acquisition of a huge piece of land in the Upper East Side of New York City to build a luxury residential complex. "The problem is Elizabeth," said Frank, flipping through the documents. "She inherited some shares in the company that's selling the land. Without her signature, the deal doesn't happen." "And she's been unyielding," added Gregory. "Seems she doesn't want to sell at any price." Richard smiled, remembering the morning scene. "I have an idea. Did you know my caretaker has known Elizabeth since they were teenagers?" "Michael?" Frank laughed. "What would a caretaker have to do with Elizabeth Parker?" "Exactly what you're thinking. They knew each other, and from what I saw today, there's history between them." Gregory's eyes lit up. "Are you suggesting that—" "I'm suggesting that perhaps Michael can help us convince the princess. After all, old friendships are powerful, don't you think? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next day, Michael was called to the main office of the house. The three businessmen were seated behind an imposing desk, like a tribunal. "Sit down," said Richard, pointing to the solitary chair in front of them. Michael obeyed, already sensing trouble. "We need a favor from you," began Frank. "What kind of favor?" "You're going to help us convince your friend Elizabeth to sign some documents," explained Gregory. "What documents?" "That's none of your business," cut in Richard. "Your business is to do what we're asking." "I can't do that, Mr. Richard. It wouldn't be right." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard stood up slowly. "It wouldn't be right," he repeated. "Michael, you've worked here for 12 years. You've always been a good employee. It would be a shame if that changed." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm being realistic. You're 62 years old. Your mother needs expensive heart medication. It wouldn't be easy to find another job at your age." Michael felt a chill in his stomach. It was true. Mrs. Margaret depended completely on medication to control her arrhythmia, and it cost a fortune. "What exactly do you want me to do?" "Simple," smiled Frank. "Gain her trust. Find out why she doesn't want to sign the sale of the land and convince her to change her mind." "As if it were that easy." "It will be easier than you imagine," said Gregory. "A wealthy, lonely woman like her must be craving genuine male attention." Michael clenched his fists but controlled himself. "And if I refuse?" "You won't refuse," said Richard with certainty, "because you know the consequences." Michael left the office feeling as if he carried the world on his shoulders. He couldn't lose his job. His mother would die without the medication, but he also couldn't accept the idea of manipulating Elizabeth. 2 days later, she returned. This time, she waited for him at the property gate, away from the boss's eyes. "You shouldn't have come back," said Michael when he saw her. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us, about what happened." "There is no us, Elizabeth. There never was." "There was," she insisted. "You were my best friend back then, the only one who understood me." "Your best friend?" He laughed humorlessly. "I was the janitor's son you used for fun when you were bored with your rich friends." "That's not true, isn't it? Then why did you never introduce me to them? Why did we always meet in secret? Elizabeth couldn't answer because deep down she knew he was right. As a teenager, she was ashamed for her upper-class friends to discover her friendship with the employee's son. I was a foolish child, she finally admitted, but you meant a lot to me. You still do. Why are you doing this? Why after 16 years? Because I could never forget you, because that accident changed my life, because I carried guilt all these years thinking that you had... That I had what? He asked again. That you had gotten hurt because of me. The beam fell because I asked you to help me get that kitten stuck up high. If I hadn't asked... Michael felt his chest tighten. He had forgotten that detail. The orphaned kitten she wanted to save. Did you save the cat? He asked softly. I did, she smiled with tears in her eyes. And you saved me. You always saved me from everything. For a moment, they were the teenagers from 16 years ago again. But reality hit hard when Michael remembered Richard's threats. Elizabeth, I need to tell you something. About my bosses. What about them? Michael took a deep breath, deciding to be honest. They want me to convince you to sign some document, a land sale or something like that. Elizabeth stiffened. And are you going to do it? I don't know. They threatened to fire me. My mother needs the medication. I'll pay for your mother's medication. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's friendship. It's what I should have done years ago. Michael looked at her deeply. Even after so long, he still saw the brave girl who had faced flames to save a kitten. Why don't you want to sell the land? Elizabeth hesitated, as if struggling with herself to decide whether to trust him. Because I know what they will do with that area. They will evict hundreds of poor families to build luxury buildings. It's exactly what my father did his whole life, and I swore I would never repeat that. Your father was like that? My father destroyed entire lives in the name of profit, including our friendship. She looked at him with regret. He was the one who forbade me from returning to the factory. He said it was dangerous, but he was actually afraid I would fall in love with an employee's son. And you obeyed. I was 15, Michael. I was rebellious in everything, except when it came to my father. He controlled me completely. And now? Now he's old and sick, and I inherited part of the business. Finally, I can do things the right way. Michael felt a growing admiration for her. The spoiled girl had become a woman with social consciousness. The bosses won't like this one bit. Leave them to me. Elizabeth, these men are dangerous. Not physically, but they have a lot of power, a lot of money. They can ruin your life. And they can ruin yours too, if they find out you told me about their plans. Michael realized he was in an impossible situation. If he helped Elizabeth, he'd lose his job. If he betrayed her, he'd lose himself. What do I do? Trust me, she said, touching his arm gently. For the first time in 16 years, trust me. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the girl he'd met when he was 15. Elizabeth was the only daughter of a powerful businessman, but she lived practically alone in the mansion. Her parents traveled constantly, leaving her in the care of employees. He was only 2 years older, but felt responsible for protecting her. Elizabeth was brave to the point of recklessness, always getting into dangerous situations, like that fateful day at the abandoned factory. They used to meet there after school. It was their secret place, away from the judging eyes of both their social classes. There they could simply be two teenagers dreaming about the future. When I grow up, I'm going to change everything, she said one afternoon, sitting on a high beam while watching the sunset through the broken windows. Change what? The way the rich treat the poor, the way my father treats people. I'm going to be different. And how are you going to do that? I don't know yet, but I'll find a way. Michael smiled at the memory. She had found a way, and now he was right in the middle of the battle she had promised to fight. The next morning, Richard called Michael again. So, have you talked to your little friend? I have. And? She doesn't want to sell. Richard's face darkened. You're not being convincing enough. Maybe you'd better find another way. The only way is for her to sign those papers, growled Frank, entering the office. And you're going to make that happen. She's stubborn, she won't change her mind easily. Then find out what makes her change her mind, suggested Gregory. Everyone has a weakness. Including you, added Richard with a cruel smile. By the way, how's your mother? I heard she fainted yesterday at the market. Michael's blood ran cold. How do you know that? Small town, news travels fast, especially when it's about the health of fragile people. The threat was clear. Michael clenched his fists, but knew he had no choice. What exactly do you want me to do? Be creative, said Richard. Use charm, use nostalgia, use whatever it takes, but make her sign. Michael left the office knowing he'd gotten into a much more dangerous situation than he'd imagined. These men weren't just greedy, they were cruel. That afternoon, Elizabeth was waiting for him at the gate again, but this time she wasn't alone. An elderly woman stood with her leaning on a cane. This is my adoptive mother, Mrs. Rose, said Elizabeth as he approached. The elderly woman smiled warmly. So you're Michael. Elizabeth has talked about you so much. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Rose. The pleasure is mine, son. You wouldn't believe how many times she's mentioned your name over the years. Michael looked at Elizabeth, surprised. I told Mrs. Rose about our friendship, she explained, and about what's happened. Why? Because I need help from someone I trust, and Mrs. Rose has always been my confidant. The elderly woman studied Michael's face with knowing eyes. You seem worried, son. There are so many things happening at once. Elizabeth told me about the pressure your bosses are putting on you. They are not good men. Do you know them? I know their reputation. Frank Wilson destroyed the neighborhood where I grew up to build a shopping mall. Gregory Pearson did the same thing with a community school. And Richard Morgan, well, he has the blackest heart of the three. What do you mean? Mrs. Rose exchanged a meaningful look with Elizabeth. You can tell us, Mrs. Rose, encouraged the young woman. 5 years ago, Richard bought the land where an old folks' home was. He promised to relocate all the residents, but when the time came, he simply threw them out. Many had nowhere to go. What happened to them? Some managed to be taken in by families, others, she shook her head sadly, weren't so lucky. Michael felt nauseous. He had worked for this man for 12 years and never knew this story. Why did you never tell me this? He asked Elizabeth. Because I wanted you to see for yourself what kind of person he is. And now? Now I need you to decide which side you're on. Michael looked at the two women, Mrs. Rose with her kind eyes and hands calloused from a lifetime of honest work, Elizabeth with her determination to right the wrongs of the past. And then he thought of his own mother, dependent on the medicine she could only afford thanks to the salary Richard paid. If I help you, my mother might... Your mother will be protected, Elizabeth assured him. I promise. How can I be sure? Because now you are not alone in this fight. That night, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He would tell Elizabeth exactly what the businessmen were planning for that land. But first, he needed to better understand what was at stake. He knew that area of the city well. It was where many humble families had managed to build their homes over the decades. They weren't luxurious buildings, but they were homes. Homes that would be destroyed to make way for buildings those same families could never afford. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. He, who had always lived in poverty, was being forced to help the rich get even richer at the expense of people like himself. But now he had a chance to make a difference. For the first time in 62 years, he could choose to do the right thing. The next day he went to Elizabeth with detailed information about the businessman's project. It's worse than I imagined, she said after hearing everything. They want to tear down not just the houses, but also the community's elementary school and health clinic. And then they'll build a luxury residential complex with private security. The people who have lived there for generations will never be able to return. We need to stop this. We will stop it, she said with determination. But I need you to help me get more information, documents, blueprints, schedules, everything you can. This is very risky. I know, but it's the only way. Michael agreed, but he knew he was signing his own death warrant. If he were discovered, he wouldn't just lose his job. Richard would make sure he never worked anywhere again. In the following weeks, Michael began to act like a spy in his own house. Whenever the bosses left, He took the opportunity to photograph project documents and maps. He discovered horrible details. They planned to use a legal loophole to speed up the evictions, offering the families laughable compensation. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now continuing. Elizabeth used this information to mobilize housing rights lawyers. Together they began building a legal defense for the threatened families, but they needed time, and time was exactly what they didn't have. Richard was growing impatient with Michael's delay in convincing Elizabeth. During a meeting at the office, he made his true intentions very clear. Either she signs by the end of the month, or we'll move to more drastic measures. What measures? Asked Michael. That's none of your business. Your business is to do the work we're paying you to do. That night, Michael called Elizabeth in a panic. They're planning something worse. I don't know what, but Richard mentioned drastic measures. Stay calm. We have lawyers working on the case. Lawyers might not be enough against men like them. Then we'll need to be smarter. What do you mean? I have an idea, but it will require you to trust me completely. What is it? Tomorrow, when they ask about me, you'll say you managed to convince me, that I'll sign the documents on Friday. Elizabeth, this is crazy. When they find out you lied, I won't be lying. I will sign the documents. Michael fell silent, processing what he had heard. Have you lost your mind? No. I found a loophole they don't know about. A way to sign without giving them what they want. Explain better. I can't explain over the phone. Let's meet tomorrow and I'll tell you everything. Michael hung up more confused than ever. Elizabeth was planning something, but he had no idea what. The next day, when they met, she explained her bold plan. I discovered that my father, before getting sick, secretly transferred his shares to a family foundation. This means I can sign the sale, but only if the money is used for social purposes. Will the businessmen accept that? They won't have a choice. It's take it or leave it. And if they leave it, then we'll have more time for the lawyers to find other ways to stop the project. It was a risky but clever plan. Michael found himself admiring even more the woman Elizabeth had become. There's just one problem, she said. What? I need you to be there when I sign, as a witness. Elizabeth, if I'm there, they'll find out I helped you. Not necessarily. You can say you convinced me exactly as they asked, that you used our old friendship to make me change my mind. They won't believe it. They will, if you're convincing. Michael realized she was asking him to act, to pretend he had betrayed her trust to save his job, when in fact he had risked everything to help her. Can you do it? She asked. I can. But what about afterward? When they find out you tricked them, then we'll have bought enough time. And me, they'll find out I knew everything. Elizabeth grew serious. Michael, if you want to back out, I understand. You've already done far more than you had to. He thought of his mother, the medications, the simple but honest life he had built, and then he thought of the families who would be evicted, the children who would lose their schools, the elderly who would have nowhere to go. I won't back out. Let's do this. On Friday, Michael walked into his boss's office with a performance worthy of the movies. I did it, he announced, feigning satisfaction. Elizabeth is going to sign. The three businessmen exchanged surprised glances. How so? Asked Frank. I used our history. I told her about my mother, about how I need this job. I appealed to her conscience. And it worked, doubted Gregory. She wants to sign today. Said she can't bear carrying this responsibility any longer. Richard smiled triumphantly. I knew you were the right man for the job, Michael. She wants you to come to her house at 5 this afternoon. Perfect, said Frank, rubbing his hands together. We're finally closing this deal. Michael left the office feeling dirty. Even knowing he was acting, he hated having to pretend he had betrayed Elizabeth. At 5 o'clock sharp, the four men arrived at the Montero family mansion. The house was imposing, with well-kept gardens and a classic architecture that was impressive. Michael had never been there, despite knowing Elizabeth for so long. She received them in the library, surrounded by old books and fine wooden furniture. She was elegant as always, but Michael noticed the tension in her eyes. Gentlemen, she said, pointing to the armchairs, make yourselves comfortable. "Let's get straight to the point," said Richard, opening the folder with the documents. "I'm sure Michael has already explained everything." "He has," agreed Elizabeth, glancing briefly at Michael. "He was very persuasive." Michael lowered his eyes, pretending to be embarrassed. "So, shall we sign?" asked Frank anxiously. "Of course. But first I need to clarify a few conditions." The three businessmen exchanged looks. "What conditions?" asked Gregory. "As you may know, I inherited these shares through a family foundation. This means the money from the sale must be used exclusively for social purposes." Silence fell over the library. Richard was the first to react. "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying you can buy the land, but the payment goes directly to social projects in the community you intend to displace." "That's ridiculous," exploded Frank. "It's what's written in the Foundation's bylaws," said Elizabeth calmly, showing a document. "I can sign the sale, but I cannot change the rules for how the money is allocated." Gregory studied the document with a lawyer's eye. "She's right," he murmured. "It's all legal." "Legal, but unacceptable," growled Richard. "We're not paying a fortune to build houses for the poor." "Then don't buy it," said Elizabeth simply. "You deceived us," accused Frank. "I deceived no one. You assumed I would sign under your conditions without informing yourselves about the legal limitations." Richard stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "This is a trap." "This is business," replied Elizabeth. "Do you accept or not?" "Obviously we don't accept." "Then our meeting is over." The three businessmen left the library furiously, leaving Michael alone with Elizabeth. He waited until he heard the cars leave before speaking. "You did it," he said with admiration. "For now, they will try to find other ways." "And are you prepared?" "I am." "The question is, are you?" Michael knew that from that moment on he would be considered an enemy by his former bosses. He could no longer go back home. "I can't go back there." "I know. That's why I prepared an alternative." Elizabeth took him to an annex of the mansion, a smaller but comfortable house at the back of the property. "You can stay here as long as you need. You and your mother." "Elizabeth, I can't accept." "Of course you can. It's the least I can do after everything you risked for me. For us." "For us?" "For the people of that community. For all the families who won't have to leave their homes because of the greed of rich men." Michael felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Pride in having done the right thing regardless of the consequences. But the consequences were not long in coming. The following Monday, Richard showed up at the house where Michael's mother lived. Mrs. Margaret, an 83-year-old woman with heart problems, was terrified when she saw her son's boss at her door. "Where is Michael?" he asked sharply. "I don't know, sir. He hasn't come home since Friday." "When he returns, tell him he's fired, and that he has 1 week to move out of the house." "Move out of the house? But sir, I've lived here for 15 years. "The house is mine. It always has been." Michael knew this when he decided to betray me. Mrs. Margaret began to cry. "Please, Mr. Richard, I'm an elderly, sick woman. I have nowhere to go." "You should have thought of that before raising an ungrateful son." Richard left, leaving the woman in despair. She immediately tried to call Michael, but he had left his cell phone at his boss's house. It was Elizabeth who received the distressed call from the elderly woman, who got her number through a neighbor. "Mrs. Margaret, calm down. Are you all right?" "I'm desperate, miss. That man said I'm going to be evicted. I have nowhere to go. I have no money." "You're not going anywhere. I'm coming to get you right now." Elizabeth rushed to Mrs. Margaret's house and found the woman in a state of panic, having difficulty breathing. "Where are your medicines?" asked Elizabeth. "They ran out yesterday. Michael always buys them, but let's go to the hospital now." On the way to the hospital, Mrs. Margaret told Elizabeth how she had raised Michael alone after her husband abandoned the family. "He was always a good boy, never gave me any trouble, worked since he was 12 to help me." "And his father?" "He showed up when Michael turned 18. Wanted to take the boy away, said he had money now and could give him a better life, but Michael refused, said he wouldn't abandon the mother who raised him." Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. Even young, Michael already had the character she so admired. At the hospital, while Mrs. Margaret was receiving medical attention, Elizabeth called Michael at the mansion. "Your mother is unwell. She's at Mercy General Hospital." "What do you mean, unwell?" "Richard went there, said you have 1 week to leave the house." Michael was silent for a few seconds. "I'm on my way." "Michael, wait. It could be dangerous." But he had already hung up. Michael arrived at the hospital within minutes. He found his mother in the emergency room, connected to machines monitoring her irregular heartbeat. "Son," she whispered when she saw him. "I'm here, Mother. How do you feel?" "Scared. That man said terrible things. He can't do anything to us. Elizabeth is taking care of everything." Mrs. Margaret looked at Elizabeth, who was waiting discreetly in the hallway. "She's a good girl. I can see it in her eyes." "Yes, Mother. She's the best person I know." "You like her?" It wasn't a question. It was a mother's observation. One of those that always hit the mark. "I do, I always have, but we're from different worlds." "Different worlds don't mean different hearts, son." That night, while Mrs. Margaret was hospitalized for observation, Michael and Elizabeth talked in the hospital garden. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't think they would go after your mother. I should have thought. I've known Richard for years. I know how cruel he is. What are we going to do?" "I don't know. My mother can't be without her medications, and I can't leave her on the street." "I already said you can stay with me. Elizabeth, your mother won't accept living in a stranger's house. Then we have to make it so I'm no longer a stranger." In the following days, Elizabeth visited Mrs. Margaret in the hospital every day. She brought flowers, talked about life, listened to stories about Michael's youth. Gradually, the two women developed a genuine friendship. "She reminds me of my daughter," Mrs. Margaret said one afternoon to Michael. "You never had a daughter." "Not by blood, but I always dreamed of having a girl to care for. Elizabeth has a heart of gold, son. She really does. And you're still in love with her." Michael didn't deny it. There was no point lying to his mother. "Since I was 17. "And her?" "She's Elizabeth Parker. Rich, educated, beautiful. She can choose any man she wants." "And she chose you." "What do you mean?" "Are you blind, son? The girl only has eyes for you. Anyone can see." Michael wanted to believe, but years of social differences had created deep wounds in his self-esteem. Meanwhile, the three businessmen hadn't given up on the project. If they couldn't buy the land legally, they would find other ways. Frank discovered there was a small overdue tax debt in Elizabeth's name. It was nothing significant, but it could be used as a pretext to complicate her life. Gregory, in turn, used his contacts to spread rumors about the financial stability of Elizabeth's company, trying to scare off potential investors. Richard adopted the cruelest tactic. He began pressuring other employees who had contact with Michael, threatening to fire them if they continued maintaining any relationship with the traitor. The situation escalated when Elizabeth received a legal summons about the overdue taxes. The amount was small, but the lawsuit could freeze her assets for months. "They're trying to break me financially," she explained to Michael. "Can they?" "In the short term, yes. If my assets are frozen, I can't pay the lawyers who are defending the community. And in the long term? In the long term, I win. But meanwhile, the families suffer." It was exactly what the businessmen wanted, to pressure Elizabeth until she gave in. But they had underestimated her determination, and especially the strength she found in Michael's support. "We'll fight," he said, "no matter how long it takes." "It's not your fight, Michael." "Of course it is. It's the fight of any decent person against uncontrolled greed." Elizabeth looked at him with emotion. "Thank you." "Why?" "For reminding me why I fell in love with you so many years ago." The words hung in the air. Elizabeth had confessed her feelings without thinking, and now she couldn't take it back. "Elizabeth, I know it seems crazy. After so long, with everything that happened, it doesn't seem crazy. It seems the most sensible thing in the world." They kissed there in the hospital garden under the stars, while inside the building Mrs. Margaret slept peacefully, finally sure that her son had found his happiness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. But personal happiness didn't solve the practical problems. The businessmen intensified their attacks, and Elizabeth had to make a drastic decision. "I'm going to sell part of my company shares," she announced in a meeting with the lawyers. "Elizabeth, this could weaken your position," warned Dr. Henry, the lead attorney, "but it will give me liquid cash to continue the fight, and it will show these men that I won't give in easily." The news of the sale quickly reached the ears of the three businessmen. They realized they had underestimated their opponent. "She's willing to lose money to defeat us," noted Frank. "This changes everything," said Gregory. "It's not just business for her, it's personal." "Then let's make it personal too," decided Richard. "If she wants war, she'll get war." Richard hired a private detective to investigate Elizabeth and Michael's past. He wanted to find something he could use against them. The detective uncovered details about the factory accident 16 years ago. He discovered that Elizabeth's father had sold the factory land shortly after the incident, without caring about the investigation into the causes of the fire. More importantly, he discovered that Michael had been seriously injured in the accident and was hospitalized for 2 months. During that period, Elizabeth had visited the hospital several times, but was always prevented from seeing him by her family. It was explosive information. If used properly, it could destroy their relationship again. Richard decided to play this card at a strategic moment. She waited until Mrs. Margaret had been discharged from the hospital and went to live in the back house of Elizabeth's mansion. On a sunny afternoon, while Michael was working in the mansion's garden and the two women were chatting on the porch, Richard appeared unannounced. "What a lovely family scene," he said sarcastically. "What do you want here?" asked Michael, stepping between Richard and the women. "I came to bring a gift, a memento from the past." Richard took a folder from his briefcase and spread old photographs on the porch table. They were pictures of the hospital, showing a teenager trying to enter a patient's room. "Do you recognize these photos, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth paled when she saw the images of herself trying to visit Michael in the hospital. "Where did you get these?" "It doesn't matter where. What matters is what they show. You lied to Michael, didn't you?" "What are you talking about?" asked Michael, picking up one of the photographs. "Your little girlfriend here said she never tried to look for you after the accident, but these photos prove otherwise." Michael studied the images. He recognized the hospital where he had been staying, and he recognized Elizabeth, younger, desperately trying to get past the reception desk. "Elizabeth?" He looked at her with confusion. "I can explain," she said with tears in her eyes. "Of course you can," laughed Richard. "You'll explain how you lied to him about never trying to visit him. You'll explain how your father forbade you from seeing the injured janitor's son." "Is it true?" asked Michael. Elizabeth couldn't answer. The tears spoke for her. "And there's more," continued Richard, showing other documents. "Your father sold the factory a week after the accident. He received a fortune for the land, which was later demolished to build a business complex." Michael sat down heavily in a chair. "Did you know about this?" I found out later. Much later. When I turned 18 and had access to the family documents. And even then you never looked for me to tell the truth. I was afraid. Afraid that you would hate me when you found out that my family benefited from your tragedy." Richard smiled triumphantly. He had managed to plant the seed of distrust that he needed. "Interesting how the rich always find ways to benefit from the suffering of the poor, isn't it, Michael?" "Get off my property," said Elizabeth coldly. "Your property?" laughed Richard. "Property bought with the money from the land where Michael almost lost his life." Michael got up and walked away without saying a word. Elizabeth tried to follow him, but he gestured for her not to approach. Mrs. Margaret, who had watched everything in silence, approached Elizabeth. "Don't let that man destroy you again," she said. "He's right, Mrs. Margaret. I lied. I omitted the truth." "You omitted out of love, not malice. Anyone can see that." "Michael won't forgive me. Not this time." "Yes, he will. Because your love is stronger than the lies of the past." But Michael didn't come home that night, nor the next. He had disappeared, and Elizabeth was desperate. She looked for him everywhere she could imagine, at the hospital where his mother had been staying, at the church he attended, at the bars in the neighborhood where he grew up. Nothing. It was Mrs. Margaret who finally guided her. "I know where he is." "Where?" At the place where you met, at the old factory. But the factory was demolished years ago. It was. But the land is still there. And there's a big tree where you used to meet. Elizabeth drove to the place where the factory where her father worked and where she had met the love of her life once stood. Now there was just an empty lot with a few old trees. She found Michael sitting under the largest one, looking at the horizon. "I knew you would find me," he said without looking at her. "We need to talk." "About what? About more lies?" Elizabeth sat beside him on the grass. "About the truth. All of it, this time." "I'm listening." "It's true that I tried to visit you in the hospital. I tried every day for 2 months, but my parents forbade me. They said it was dangerous, that I could be blamed for the accident. And you obeyed. I was 15, Michael. I was rebellious about many things, but when my parents used the word danger, I obeyed. And then? Then you disappeared. Nobody knew where you had gone. I thought you had... That I had what? That you had left because of me, because I couldn't protect you properly. Michael finally looked at her. "I left the city. I went to live with an uncle in the country. I stayed there 3 years. Why? Because I couldn't stay in a place that reminded me of you all the time." Elizabeth felt tears stream down her face. "I never stopped looking for you. Even after you came back and started working for Richard, I knew you were here, but I didn't have the courage to approach you." "Why?" "Because I found out the truth about my father, about how he benefited from the accident, about how our family got rich at the expense of other people's tragedy." "And did that change anything between us?" "It changed everything. How could I look for you, knowing that my wealth was built on your suffering?" Michael was silent for a few minutes, processing everything he had heard. "You are not your father, Elizabeth." "No?" "No. You are using your wealth to help people, to correct the mistakes of the past. That has to mean something. It means that I love you, that I have always loved you, that everything I do is an attempt to make up for what my family did." "You don't have to make up for anything. You were a child. But now I am an adult, and I can choose to do things differently." They kissed again, but this time the kiss tasted of forgiveness, of a new beginning, of promises for the future. "Let's go home," said Elizabeth. "Home," he agreed. But when they reached the mansion, they found Mrs. Margaret in a panic. "Thank God you're back," she exclaimed. What happened?" "Some men arrived here. They said they came to get you for a meeting." "What men?" "The 3 bosses. They said if you don't go, they will harm the community." Michael and Elizabeth exchanged looks. They knew it wasn't a bluff. The businessmen were capable of anything. "Where is the meeting?" asked Elizabeth. "At the company office, at 9 tonight. It was 8:15. They had less than an hour." "It's a trap," said Michael. "Definitely, but we have no choice." "Yes, we do. We can call the lawyers." "The lawyers can't stop them from harming innocent people." "We can." "How?" "By trusting each other. For real, this time." At 9 o'clock sharp, Michael and Elizabeth arrived at the company building. The parking lot was empty. Only the lights on the top floor were on. In the elevator, Elizabeth held Michael's hand. "Whatever happens, I love you." "I love you too." The elevator doors opened, revealing a dimly lit office. The 3 businessmen were seated behind a long table, like an impromptu tribunal. "How punctual," said Richard. "Sit down." "We prefer to stand," replied Elizabeth. "Suit yourselves. Let's get straight to the point. You ruined our plans, cost us millions, and on top of that you made us look like fools." "You made yourselves look like fools," retorted Michael. "Watch your words, groundskeeper. You don't work for me anymore, but I can still destroy your life." "My life was already destroyed once by people like you. I'm not afraid anymore." "You should be," said Frank, "because this time it's not just your life that's at stake." "What are you talking about?" Gregory opened a laptop and showed a screen. It was a live broadcast from a community they recognized, the neighborhood that would be demolished for the project. "Our men are there now," explained Richard, "with very specific orders." "What orders?" "If you don't sign the sale documents under the original terms by midnight, They will start demolishing the houses, whether the families are inside or not. Elizabeth turned pale. You wouldn't do that. Wouldn't we? Laughed Frank. You haven't known us for long, dear. But Michael has known us for years. Tell her, Michael. Tell her what we did with the nursing home. Michael felt nauseous remembering the story Mrs. Rose had told. They've done it before, he admitted reluctantly. And we'll do it again, confirmed Richard, unless you are reasonable. What exactly do you want? Simple. Elizabeth signs the sale at the original price, without those ridiculous social foundation conditions, and you, Michael, disappear from her life forever. And if we refuse, then at 12:01 in the morning, several families will have nowhere to sleep. Elizabeth looked at Michael, seeing the despair in his eyes. He was being forced to choose between her and the lives of innocent people. Can I speak with Michael in private? 5 minutes, granted Richard. They stepped out into the hallway, under the watchful eyes of the businessman. We won't let this happen, whispered Elizabeth. How are we going to stop it? They have men there. They have machinery. If we don't do what they want, those people will lose their homes anyway, only legally. At least they won't get hurt. Michael, listen, I have a plan, but I need you to trust me completely. What plan? I'll sign the documents, Elizabeth, but not here. I'll ask to sign tomorrow at the notary's office with official witnesses. And you think they'll agree? They will if I give them enough guarantees. What guarantees? You will stay here as a hostage until I sign tomorrow. Absolutely not. It's the only way. And meanwhile, our lawyers will have time to get a court order to stop the demolition. Elizabeth, it's too risky. Riskier than letting them destroy the houses tonight? Michael knew she was right. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only one that would protect the innocent families. All right, let's do it. They returned to the office. We've decided, announced Elizabeth. I'll sign the documents, but not here. I need notarization for it to be valid. What kind of fools do you think we are? Asked Frank. The kind who want to do legal business. If I sign here, you have no guarantee that the document will be accepted by the property registry. The three businessmen whispered among themselves. Gregory, as the lawyer, confirmed that she was technically correct. Fine, agreed Richard. But Michael stays here until you sign. For how long? Until tomorrow at 6 in the evening. If you don't show up at the notary's office, Michael will find out what it's like to fly from the 10th floor. The threat was clear and direct. Elizabeth swallowed hard. And the families? Will you leave them alone until tomorrow? If you don't try anything funny, they'll be safe. All right, we accept the deal. Elizabeth approached Michael. Everything will be all right, she whispered, kissing him lightly. I trust you, he replied. Elizabeth left the building knowing she had less than 20 hours to save the man she loved and the innocent families. But now she had a plan. The first call was to Dr. Henry, the lawyer. I need an urgent court order to stop any demolition in St. Joseph's neighborhood. Elizabeth, it's 10 at night. The courts are closed. Is there any way to get an emergency ruling? Only in cases of imminent danger to life. That's exactly what we have. The second call was to Mrs. Rose. I need you to help me mobilize the whole community. This might be our only chance. What do you need me to do? Gather all the families in the central square, bring cameras, cell phones, anything that can record images. If they try to tear anything down, I want everyone filming. The third call was to an investigative journalist she knew. Robert, I need a favor that could give you the story of your career. I'm listening. 3 businessmen are threatening to demolish an entire neighborhood tonight, with families still inside their homes. Want the exclusive? By 5 in the morning, Elizabeth had obtained the court injunction. By 6, a news crew was positioned in the neighborhood. By 7, 200 families were gathered in the square with protest signs. When the men hired by the businessmen arrived with the demolition equipment, they found an organized crowd, television cameras, and a court order preventing any action. The demolition crew leader immediately called Richard. Boss, we have a problem here. What kind of problem? Court order, press, and a whole lot of people. Richard looked at Michael, who had been tied to a chair in the office since the night before. Your little girlfriend is smarter than we thought. She's the most intelligent woman I know, Michael said with pride. It won't do any good. growled Frank. "We're just delaying the inevitable." "You don't understand," said Michael. "It's not about delaying, it's about showing everyone who you really are." Gregory turned on the television in the office. The morning news was broadcasting live from St. Joseph's neighborhood, where entire families organized overnight to prevent the illegal demolition of their homes. Authorities confirmed there was no permit for the demolition, and those responsible could face charges for criminal conspiracy and threats. "Shit!" exclaimed Frank. "Now everyone knows," said Michael. "There's no way to hide it anymore." Richard picked up the phone and called Elizabeth. "You're very clever, but the game isn't over yet." "It's over for me," she replied. "You lost and everyone knows who you are. Michael is still here with me, and if anything happens to him, you'll go to jail. There are building cameras, we have witnesses, we have everything documented. You think we care? I think you do care, because you're cowards. You always have been. You only know how to attack defenseless people." Richard hung up the phone angrily. "What do we do now?" asked Frank. "Now we cut our losses," said Gregory. "We release Michael and pretend this never happened." "No way," growled Richard. "If we're going down, we're taking them with us." But at that moment, the office door opened. It was federal police officers, accompanied by Elizabeth and Dr. Henry. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest," announced the detective. "Why?" asked Frank. "False imprisonment, threats, attempted extortion, and criminal conspiracy." While the three businessmen were handcuffed, Elizabeth ran to free Michael. "You did it," he said, hugging her tightly. "We did it." "How?" "The only way possible. With the truth." 6 months later, Michael and Elizabeth were in the same square in St. Joseph's neighborhood, where the community had gathered to resist the demolition. But now it was a party. A wedding party. Mrs. Margaret, radiant in her new dress, led Elizabeth to the makeshift altar where Michael waited for her. The families from the entire neighborhood were present, along with Mrs. Rose, Dr. Henry, and even the journalist Robert, who had covered the story. "You took your time getting it right," said the priest with a smile, "but love always finds a way." During the ceremony, Michael thought about the journey that had brought them there. Two teenagers separated by a tragedy, reunited decades later to fight together against injustice. "Do you take Elizabeth as your wife?" asked the priest. "I do, forever." "Do you take Michael as your husband?" "I do, until life parts us." When they kissed as husband and wife, the whole community applauded. It was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of love's victory over prejudice, of justice over greed, of unity over division. During the reception, Mrs. Margaret pulled the newlyweds aside. "You know I'm proud, don't you?" "We know, Mom," said Michael. Elizabeth had asked to call her Mom too. "Not just for the wedding, for what you did for these people." "We did what was right," said Elizabeth. "You did more than that. You proved love can change the world." 1 year later, St. Joseph's neighborhood had become a national model for sustainable community development. With the money that would have been used for the original project, Elizabeth and Michael created a foundation that offered microcredit, vocational courses, and legal support for low-income families. Michael became the foundation's director, using his life experience to understand the community's real needs. Elizabeth managed the resources and partnerships with other social organizations. The three businessmen were sentenced to semi-open prison and heavy fines. Richard lost his company and his home. Frank developed heart problems in prison. Gregory was the only one who showed remorse, publicly apologizing to the affected families. "Do you think they learned anything?" Elizabeth asked one night as she and Michael reviewed foundation reports. "Not all of them, but maybe 1 or 2 will rethink their lives. And if they don't, then at least others will know there are consequences for greed." 2 years after the wedding, Mrs. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her last wish was to be buried beside her husband in the small neighborhood cemetery where she had raised Michael. During the funeral, hundreds of people came to pay their respects, people whose lives had been touched by her kindness and her son's struggle. "She died knowing you were happy," said Elizabeth, comforting Michael, "and knowing you were part of the family. I always was, since that first day at the factory when you saved me from the fire." "Who saved who?" We saved each other. 5 years later, they had 2 children. Ethan, in honor of the first boy Elizabeth had tried to save at the factory, and Margaret, in honor of the woman who had raised Michael with so much love. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, were separated, and found each other again. They learned that true love overcomes any obstacle, but that it also needs to be accompanied by concrete actions to change the world. "Daddy," asked 5-year-old Ethan, "why did those bad men want to tear down people's houses?" "Because they confused money with happiness," Michael replied. "And Mommy, why did she help people even though she was rich?" "Because she understood that true wealth comes from helping others," Elizabeth explained. 10 years after the wedding, Michael and Elizabeth opened a school on the site of the old factory. It was a technical school that taught practical professions to young people from underprivileged communities. At the opening ceremony, they planted a tree exactly where they had kissed for the first time as teenagers, and where they had reunited as adults to forgive the past. "Impossible," said Michael, looking at everything they had built together. "What?" "Remember the party where we met again? The bosses said it was impossible for a humble groundskeeper to talk to a princess." "And they were right," laughed Elizabeth. "What do you mean?" "Because we weren't just a groundskeeper and a princess. We were 2 people in love, trying to find our way back to each other." Michael kissed her under the tree they had planted as children from the school ran around them playing. The impossible had truly happened. Not only had the groundskeeper spoken to the princess, they had discovered that beneath social labels, they were simply 2 halves of the same heart. And did they live happily ever after? Yes, but not in the fairy tale way. They lived with the normal challenges of any couple, with occasional arguments, financial worries from the foundation, and the difficulties of raising 2 children in a complex world. But they lived knowing they had chosen each other not once but twice. Once as innocent teenagers, and again as adults who understood what truly mattered in life. They lived knowing that true love isn't a fairy tale where everything is perfect. It's a daily choice to build something good together, to face hardships hand in hand, and to use the strength that comes from unity to make the world a little better. The impossible happened because they discovered nothing is impossible when 2 people decide their love is greater than any obstacle life may put in their path. End of story. And what did you think of this story of love and perseverance? Were you rooting for Michael and Elizabeth from the beginning? Leave in the comments what your favorite part was and whether you believe love can truly overcome all difficulties. Thank you so much for following along. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.